So the basics of JavaScript. So here's what we're going to go over today. What is JavaScript? Why we use it? Why should you learn? The evolution of JavaScript. Different ways of learning JavaScript, which I just labeled JavaScript plan. The syntax of JavaScript, resources, and a conclusion. So let's get into it. So what is JavaScript? JavaScript is a standard coding language used for web applications. It could be used for other small programs too, but you mostly see it in web applications. It could be used for front end and back end. And the reason this is good is because in the past, I think you would use a different language, like a completely different language to do the back end. But now there's these certain frameworks that allow you to use the JavaScript language. And it's a big advantage in the tech industry to understand JavaScript, I think, for that reason. So if you're a little familiar with web development, there's also HTML, which is structure, and CSS, which is like the styling. It's probably a good idea to learn a little bit of those basics before jumping into JavaScript if you're gonna want to pursue some sort of web development career or just like your own interest, right? Continuing on. So really quickly, a scripting language, what is it? It's a programming language designed specifically for acting on an existing entity or system. These scripts can be executed without a compiler. And there's two different kinds of scripting languages. Scripting client and server side. So client side scripts, these scripting languages run on the client side, which is their web browser. And the server side, these scripting languages run on the server. And like I said before, JavaScript can be used for both the client side and the server side, which is a big pro. So some examples of where you might see JavaScript. Online shopping, maybe you click a couple buttons, it takes you to some checkout page, user registration, zooming in and out, drop-down menus. Those are all JavaScript functionalities. So when you think of JavaScript, think of all the different types of actions you could do and the outcomes that come out of it. So why do we use JavaScript? It's the language of the web. JavaScript makes web pages dynamic, and also there's a lot of frameworks and libraries that make building websites easier and faster. Some of the ones included are React, React Native, Angular, Node.js. And there's a funny quote that they say, there's a new framework every day, which is kind of true because I think it's been a current trend that people start building new frameworks. So yeah, continuing on. Some popular applications that use JavaScript a lot are PayPal, Netflix, Uber, LinkedIn, some iOS and Android apps, and desktop applications. So yeah, it's cool. So why should you learn JavaScript? Learning JavaScript will open many new doors, and it's not too hard as long as you get the basics down and you have some ideas in mind. You could do projects and new projects, new types of projects. You could work for a web development career, and you can finally build ideas you have. Like if you've done CS1 and CS2, you've probably used C++, and it's a little hard to make your own projects outside of class because you don't have the feedback that JavaScript allows you to have immediately. And I think that's a really rewarding part about learning JavaScript in conjunction with HTML and CSS. So really quick, the evolution of JavaScript. Here's a quick timeline. It was first invented in 1986, and it's continuing to go through new updates every year. And there's also something called Ecmascript, which I'll talk about really quick, but it's basically let me move to the next slide. It's specifications that the language needs to follow for it to be considered a scripting language. So Ecmascript provides rules and details and guidelines that scripting languages must observe to be considered Ecmascript compliant. So Ecmascript Evolution, there's been many changes, and there's actually, this is not the full list. There's a new change happening 2022. It's going to happen in June, and I already put a link to, if you want to read about the updates that JavaScript's going to receive. It's called ES13, and it adds new stuff to the language. So here's two different paths that I would use to approach learning JavaScript. So this is one that I feel would benefit most people, but you don't have to take this one. The first one is get the basics down, which is what I'm going to teach in this presentation, this workshop. And after that, you adopt a popular framework or library. And when the need arises, you learn like advanced JavaScript concepts. So I think this is a really motivating way to get into JavaScript, because you have something to look forward to. You want to get into the popular stuff. You don't have to learn all the JavaScript syntax top to bottom. Just learn the basics and then jump in to try to build a project maybe, and then jump in and adopt like any framework or library you'd like to learn. Or you could learn the basics and advanced syntax so you feel very prepared, and then you could adopt a popular framework or library. I suggest Vue, because you don't have to learn any additional little syntaxes. It's very similar to JavaScript, and I'll attach a link to the Vue homepage, which gives you different documentation, and you'll see how similar it is to the JavaScript language. So moving on. So now we're going to get into basic JavaScript knowledge. This is the very basic stuff that you should know. And it's variables, strings, control structures, functions, arrays, objects, and events. You probably have heard of a lot of these things if you've taken CS1 and CS2. Even CS1, you've heard of most of these things, minus events probably, and objects. So let's keep going. So basic syntax, fixed values are called literals. There's numbers which are written with or without decimals. So like a 10 or 10.0, 10.1. Strings, you are written with double quotations or single quotations. And I just want to differentiate, like let's say you're saying the word you are, like you're awesome. To get that little single quote there, you have to use double quotations on the outside when doing this. But if not, you can use single quotes. It's not a big deal. So variable values are called variables, big surprise. And to declare them, there's 3 different ways. There's var, let, and const. And I suggest looking into the differences between let and var, but it's best practice to use let, and I'll go into that a little more in the next slide. Some JavaScript operators include arithmetic operators, such as plus, minus, divided by, times, just to do simple calculations, adding 2 numbers, subtracting 2 numbers, etc. And then there's an assignment operator. This is like assigning a variable a value. So in C++, you would do like int car equals red, and that the assignment value would be the equal sign. So JavaScript expression, an expression is a combination of values, variables, and operators which computes to a value. So that's just like all of the top, what we just covered is combining all of them together would create an expression. And lastly, some comments, code after double slashes or between a slash and an asterisk and a slash is treated as a comment. If you wanted to do a paragraph like of comments, you would use the second way I showed you. If you wanted to do just 1 line, you just use 2 slashes. Moving on. So let's go into what, like a little bit more what variables are. So variables are containers for storing data. There's 3 different ways to declare a variable. There's const and constant variables that are variables that can't be changed, right? There's also let and var. And I think I said I was going to go into these a little more. So let me see if I included this part. Yeah. Good. So let versus var. Var and let allow you to assign a value to a variable and also change the value of the variable later on in the code. The main difference, let deals with the block scope and var deals with a global scope or function scope, depending on where it's includes. So use let. And if you want to get more detailed and like probably a better example of why there's a difference, I left this link here. Let me know if you want it in the chat. But basically, a good example would be if you were to use a var in a function and you try to use that same variable outside, it'll allow you to do so. And this is pretty dangerous because you might not want to change that variable type. It could mess up the whole code and give you a wrong output. And that's why using let is a safer option when assigning variables. Continuing on. Next is the control structure and flow. So the control structure within JavaScript allows program flow to change within, you want it? Okay. I'll send it to you after the presentation, but I'll definitely send it to you one. The control structures within JavaScript allow the program flow to change within the unit of code of function. So there's 3 different types of structures that can control the flow of a JavaScript program. And if you take in CS1, once again, these probably aren't new, minus these 2 new for loops down here. But the conditional statements are if, else, else if, and switch. And switch is kind of like case in C++, but here it's switch in JavaScript. The other stuff over here are loops, for in, for of, while, and do while. So a for loop loops through a block of code a number of times. A for in loop loops through the properties of an object. We'll go through what an object is in a little bit. For of loops through a value of an iterable object. While loops through a block of code while a specified condition is true. And a do while loop also loops through a block of code while a specified condition is true. So moving on. The last part of the control structure and flow is jumps or breaks and continue. This allows you to jump out of a code block if needed. So the break statement jumps out of a loop. The continue statement jumps out of one iteration in a loop. Continuing on. Functions. This is a big topic and I don't expect everyone to catch on to it like immediately. And that's where you going in and like trying to code out a function on your own, like a simple arithmetic function is going to help you out a lot just in understanding the syntax of JavaScript. So JavaScript functions perform a specific task that can be used when invoked or called. A JavaScript function is defined with the function keyword followed by the name followed by parentheses. And the good thing about JavaScript is that it's a lot like C++. Like the syntax, it uses curly brackets, and the way you do functions is kind of the same. Also, there's a if you notice here, there's like semicolons when you finish a statement. You don't have to put that, but it's best practice to stick with that and use semicolons. I highly suggest using them. So yeah, this is a very simple function right here. Function, my function AB returns A times B. So you call it over here, my function, and this is the parameters 4 and 3, and it gets multiplied and it gets returned and set to this variable X. As you can see, they're using the let variable declaration keyword because it's better. So moving on to objects, properties, and methods. if you've taken only CS1, I don't think you've gone into objects. If you have, let me know in the chat. Congrats. But objects are like variables, but they can hold many values. So when you think of an object, like actually think of an object like a chair or a car or a plane. So a car has a name, that's a property. A car has a model, it has weight, and it has a color. And these are all properties. And methods in an object, since methods are kind of like a function. It tells the car what to do. So car.start turns on the car.drive, you drive the car.brake, you slow down the car, and car.stop, you completely stop, right? Let me know if you have any questions in the chat. If not, just say no. All right, I'll take silence as a no. Okay. So yeah, objects, properties, and methods, those are the three big things when it comes to objects. So properties, let's get into them a little bit. How do you create an object? You declare an object with the word const, the const keyword. Like I said before, const is usually used when you don't want a variable to change. But you could also use it when you're creating an object. And objects follow the syntax. You have the property name here and the property value, but between these two items, there's a colon, and after there's a comma. And you do that for all of them except the very last one. And then you end it with your curly bracket or your curly brace and a semicolon. And that's an object. If you could do that, you've created your first object. So how do you access an object? There's one of two ways you could do it. I like the first way more, just typing more. I think adding the square brackets plus the quotations is typing more. I just like adding the dot. So object name would be person, and property name would be one of these values on the left side. So if I were to say person dot last name, I would return doe. Well, I would have to add another keyword in front of it, like alert. But you could look into that later if you want. So continuing on, methods. A method is a function that can be stored as a property. So like the last example, we have properties, and we got the property names and property values, but you could also store a function in a property, like as a property. And this function returns this instruction. So you don't need to know exactly what this keyword is. I think that would be a little bit more of an advanced topic, and this is just showing that you have that functionality, that you could have functions inside of an object. And it doesn't have to be in this form either. You can have it like outside of the value. Continuing on, we have arrays. So an array is a variable that can hold many values in a single variable. So let's say you have a car, like a cars variable that you don't want to change. But okay, it's a little confusing because you have the const keyword, which means you don't want it to change. But when you're talking about an array, that's how you create it. You have the keyword const, and then you have any values you want inside. So let car equal cars 0 would say this variable car is equal to this sab. I've never heard of that, but sab, because 0 is the first index here. So it goes 0, 1, 2, and that's how you access the array. And if you wanted to change a value in an array, it would look something like this. So cars 0 equals G-Wagon. That would change this array and delete this string value and change it to G-Wagon. So if you were to print the cars array, it'd say G-Wagon, Volvo, and BMW. So yeah, that's arrays. Continuing on. Oh, another big thing about JavaScript is there's this really cool topic called array methods. So array methods are built-in JavaScript properties and methods, and here are two examples. So we have cars.length returns the number of elements, and cars.sort sorts the array. So let's say you have an unordered array of integers, numbers, 1 through 10, but they're out of order. So you could use the dot sort method to sort them in order. And I provided a link to all the array methods that you could check out, and you can mess around with them. Continuing on, we have events. So HTML has events that can occur, such as web page loading, clicking a button, and scrolling. And these are all the events, well, not all of them, but I think most of them that can happen. And JavaScript can react to these elements and perform some action. So I know this line of code here looks pretty intimidating, but it's very simple. It's an HTML line of code with some JavaScript inside of it. I mean, yeah. So there's a button, and when you click it, it gets the document. It goes to the document model, and you don't have to know anything of that, but it calls this this function here, date, and it plays this. It prints this. The time is, and it sets it to date when you click it. So that's a really cool thing. If you've ever wondered how when clicking something happens, well, that's basically what's happening here. You click an HTML event and JavaScript reacts, and in turn it gives you something like an output that you want. Really anything you could think of, clicking a button on a screen and some output happening, that's a event and a JavaScript reaction. Moving on, we have the resources for this. So JavaScript W3 Schools is really helpful for learning the basics of JavaScript. And I really encourage you guys to try to do one of your own projects. This includes, let me show you this website. Let me know if you guys could see this. Can you guys see this?
Yes. Yeah, we can.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot of projects here for you to choose from, and I really encourage you guys to pick one that you like, any of them that you like. They're all beginner friendly, and just jump into it and try to learn something from it, and then you could put it on your resume, or you could just have it for fun. And if you guys would like to see me walk through any of these projects, maybe in the next tutorial I can walk through one of them, and yeah, you can learn something through that. Does anybody have any questions about what we've gone over today? See, nope, from Juan. Okay. Oh, I think you wanted this link. But I believe I'll be posting this PowerPoint in the Discord chat for you all to check out. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it.